Woo, it is time for your Wednesday Q&A. And baby, let me tell you, well, we got a couple of great questions to get into. A few, actually, and a very interesting element of the week. I got an email earlier, and I just think this is so damn funny. I'm going to read you this email. Got this into bbs@sovereigntech.com. Good morning. We had a customer that left a huge sum of money in our care and then died in a sudden mishap whilst on vacation somewhere in Europe. I write to you today because you and him had the same family name, and there is urgent need for you to apply and claim this fund. Otherwise, it will be lost forever. I will be glad to direct you on how you can legally and successfully inherit this funds for our gain. For more details, kindly contact me on this address, blah, 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 with friendly greetings. Because there's another person out there named Sovereign, right? Okay. The irony. The fucking irony. And it just, like, I'm reading it, and I mean, obviously, it's this, same old Nigerian prince bullshit, but what a hoot, It's like they had the same family name. Oh, really? Not to say that I don't have another last name, but, like, my bbs@sovereigntech.com address is absolutely clear, addressed to Brian Sovereign and Brian Sovereign only and alone. And it was just, yeah, I almost wanted to email them back and say, really, who had my last name? Could you tell me what their name was? Oh, it just would have been hilarious. But of course, you don't respond to these emails in this, at all, ever. So anyway, just hilarious. I'm like, yeah, well, there's more sovereigns out there. Well, I can't wait to meet them. This family I never knew I had. Anyway, something I got a lot of comments on. Well, first of all, I hope everybody enjoyed the user podcast. That was user podcast episode 4 that came out earlier today. I actually planned for it to come out earlier in the week, hell, even earlier in the month. But things ended up working out in a way that there was a lot more to talk about. In fact, there was so much more to talk about that I ended up splitting the episode pretty much. I mean, it's a cohesive whole for what it is, but, the topic. But we're going to do another episode about the moon in February, and then actually, as long as everything goes according to plan, there will be multiple user podcasts coming out in February, just to get past some of these subjects that there's really so much to say on. And I know a lot of people, I do want to say this quick, okay, about the user podcast. I've gotten some feedback from people saying, well, what does this have to do with me being free? Okay, you're not hearing what I'm talking about, because, and I appreciate, like, I'm not knocking you. I'm just saying it'll become a complete picture. And that's the whole point of, what inspired me to do the user podcast, and I have other things I want to talk about. What inspired me to do the user podcast was a great patron, great friend suggested that, hey, you should put together like smaller episodes that more or less like describe your positions on things, because, people aren't going to listen to, or most people won't listen to 6-7 years of Sovereign Tech, to really, and even at the time when he suggested, I think it was like 4 or 5 years that they would have had to listen to, where they're going to be able to pick up everything that you're putting down. Like, you got to put together something where people can very quickly, get on board with how you think about things. So understand, like, the first episode of User Podcast, we're giving, in my opinion, the Bible a good thrashing, as well as my thoughts on the origin or lack thereof of the universe. Also, then we go on to an episode about the sun, which wasn't really about the sun. What it was really about was we need to get the fuck out to outer space, because eventually that bright ball is going to go out. Right? And why it's important to do that. Third episode was the nature of knowledge. Okay, and I mean, that's the basis of fucking everything, as far as the human condition in a very real way, right? As we get past the broken divide and so on. So, or as we got past it. So that's a very important thing. Like, you got to start at these points for everything that I'm about to say later on to make sense and for it to be a cohesive whole. So understand that, in the end, it all will make sense, and it'll all be in very short episodes that are very digestible for people to pick up on. The one earlier today was about the moon. I guarantee you that has a lot to do with a lot of things. And if you didn't get it in the first episode, in the second, or in the sequel episode to this one, I think it will all come together a little bit more. And then, we're going to go on to other subjects. And believe me, they all have a point to where they create a cohesive worldview that's all about you breaking free from the system. So, if you're wondering or just being patient, I mean, that's how it's going to shape up. And we'll get to the really, I know what a lot of people want me to talk about. A lot of people want me to talk about property. They want me to talk about rights. They want me to talk about anarchy, all of that. And we'll get there. Okay, but you've got to lay down foundation for that first. That's the problem. That's why I think a lot of people don't buy into anarchism initially, is because you don't give them the complete argument. You don't give them a foundational argument. And I mean like a galactic foundational argument. Like you can't just pull off, I don't know, some horse shit like like Hoppe with argumentation ethics, right? Like you can't just come with that. You've got to give a lot more, and you've got to explain the human condition more, and I don't think he's ever done a good job of that either. But anyway, you got to give him more. And so that's what I'm working on. And also at the same time, it will, when it's done and done. Well, actually, I don't ever plan on stop doing the user podcast. There's really no reason to. There's so much to explore with that. But when it gets to a certain point, it's something that people can pick up, listen to quickly, and they can get right on ramped with everything that we talk about on Sovereign Tech. So that's the score. But anyway, not exactly here to talk about that. But another thing I got a ton of feedback on was actually, amazingly, in fact, it's the computer that I'm recording this podcast on right now. A lot of people reacted very favorably to my review of the third generation ThinkPad 11e, and people had some questions about things that I said in that. The one that I'll address right now is I did say that in my perfect world, everybody would be using Tails as their operating system and so on. And some people said, "Wait, is that actually viable to do?" Okay, I want to, so because I got that from quite a few of you, I want to touch on that. All right. It's kind of I guess our first tech question. Then we have another tech question to get into. Tails being a viable operating system. Okay, Tails. So for those that don't know, Tails is that stands for the amnesic whatever operating system. And it basically is run by, it's maintained by the Tor project, and it is a flavor, I guess you could say, or distro of Debian that routes everything through Tor. Now, the word amnesic is in it because by default, the way that it's set up, first off, you can't install it on a traditional hard drive. Okay, you have to install it either on a DVD disk, or you put it onto a USB drive of some kind. And the basic gist of the way that it's normally supposed to be run is that when you boot it up, you use it to do whatever, and often activists will use this, or other people that are in need of a very highly secure operating system. And I'm not even arguing that it's as secure as, say, CubesOS or something like that, but it's on par. Or at least it's in that ballpark. Okay, and certainly a lot easier to start using and run than CubesOS necessarily is right now for the average person. I do think anybody can use Tails. Okay, in fact, they just updated to version 3.12, and I think with that, they made it a lot easier to install on a flash drive. In fact, it used to be where you had to have, if you were doing it with a Windows computer, you actually had to have two USB drives, and you kind of had to do this go-between trick that was really crazy. But now with the new way that they have it set up, you can do it right natively, more or less through Windows, and you can install you can install it right to the USB drive, and you don't have to do any crazy tricks to make that happen. I always installed it from Ubuntu, and it would work beautifully. And then really once you have one Tails, once you have one flash drive with Tails OS on it, you can plug in any other flash drive to the same computer that Tails OS is plugged into, and you can just make copies, totally new versions of the operating system from that one flash drive that you have. And, that's what I've been doing over the years. But regardless of that, it is actually possible, I think, for people to use it and the everyday person to install it now, as to where it might not have been so much even before version 3.12, which just came out, I think, a few days ago. But basically, the way that it normally runs is that when you boot into it, you do what you want, you do what you need to do, again, be it activist work or just your secret shit, whatever that is. And then as soon as you restart the computer, as soon as you log out of the OS, it forgets everything that you did. Like it doesn't keep a persistent storage. Okay. Now, a few versions ago of Tails, they did give you the option of persistent storage in Tails OS, to where you could create a flash drive that's running Tails OS, plug it into whatever computer you want, as long as it can get past the UEFI and all that, or the BIOS. You might have to configure that a little bit. And then you would have a persistent partition on there that's encrypted, and before you log into Tails, it will ask you to, if you want to unlock your persistent partition. This would also allow you to install other software on there. Like Tails doesn't normally come with VLC, but you could put VLC on there so you could watch movies or whatever, TV shows, you name it. You could even throw a game of chess on there because it normally doesn't come with any games or anything. Originally, the idea with Tails was it was not meant to be like a full-blown operating system that you would use necessarily on a daily basis, but it has become something where you could very much do that if you wanted. Okay, but there's tricks around that. Now, if people were really interested, if this is something you really, really want to do, there are still limitations, there are still things you cannot do, and there's still some software, even if it's meant for Debian, there's still some software that just doesn't play well when it's all being routed through Tor or, through a lot of the security features that are set up in Tails, or that are by default, okay? But like I would be willing, in fact, I think it'd be great to do for a Sovereign Tech Prime episode. If people want to get in touch with me, I would be willing to kind of go over the process. I mean, it's audio, it's a podcast, so I can't like show you how to install it, but I could give you kind of a play-by-play of what you want to do once you have it installed onto the USB drive, and what options there are, what challenges you're going to run into, and so on. But I did mean what I said. That yes, I would love a world where everybody was doing that, where it was running Tails OS, everything was getting routed through Tor, and so on. There's a few things that I wish Tails was a little more, you can configure it, because it's Debian, you can configure it pretty well as much as you want, I suppose. But there are a few things I wish that it kind of had more open by default. But in general, yeah, I mean, if you just want to check your email, if you are, granted, so there's an unsafe web browser on there and there's the Tor browser. Yeah, again, it's a perfect world situation for me where I wish that the internet didn't run on so much JavaScript, right? Because the Tor browser has no script automatically installed on it. And I think it has uBlock origin, and that's it, which actually leads well into our next question, or our next subject that was sent in to me, by a patron. But, yeah, I mean, the internet that the Tor browser can handle, I want that to be the way that the internet is, just like this real emphasis on security. So yeah, I'd love it if everybody used Tails OS. And I think, outside of like hardcore or not even light gaming, outside of, as long as you're willing to not game on it necessarily, there's not a whole lot that you can't do with it. You can record a podcast on it, because Audacity comes pre-installed. It comes with a Bitcoin wallet. It comes with, Electrum pre-installed. It comes with all kinds of things, like already ready to go and for you to use and do the business. It has LibreOffice automatically on there, Thunderbird, and so on. So yeah, it's very much, there's no reason I wouldn't call it a full-featured operating system now that people could use as a daily driver if they wanted. I use it more often than not, frankly. So yeah, again, just to say, I'm totally serious about that. Absolutely. But also, I'm not going to kid myself and think that that's ever going to actually happen, right? Because first off, you have to convince people why they want to use Tails or why they should use Tails. And look, if you can't even convince people to just use stock Linux, or use Ubuntu instead of Windows, honestly, what hope do you have of convincing them to use Tails? I don't think it's going to happen. But, speaking of that, and this will actually, like I say, this will lead into our next subject here. I got this. I think someone just said, well, this really blows, and when they sent this link to me. But I have heard about this story, and something that people might end up getting off of. Actually, this might really hurt Google Chrome, which Google Chrome right now is the biggest web browser in the world, no doubt about that. And you certainly have plenty of people clamoring for, ever since Edge they announced that, I don't know if it'll be in April, but they are switching over Edge to, the Chromium, or to the Blink rendering engine, Chromium pretty much. And they're getting rid of Edge HTML. A lot of people are saying, okay, look, everybody's on this, even though Safari is still technically WebKit, but it's kind of the same idea. Since everybody's on this, Opera's on it, whatever. Come on, Firefox. Like, we know you just developed this really hot quantum engine, rendering engine for websites, but just give up and let's just have one big standard out there. No. And this is partly why, because Google is, in a future version of Chrome, is apparently the way that they're setting up some of the API changes for it. Their argument is it's going to make pages load faster, it's going to have greater privacy, and it's going to make the browser overall more secure. It's going to break a ton of extensions that just won't work anymore at all, including uBlock Origin, which is the number one. That's like if you asked me and said, hey, okay, I'm only going to put one extension on a browser, what's the extension you're going to have me put on there? I would tell you uBlock Origin in a heartbeat. It is absolutely the first thing I install on any browser. I mean, you do it right away. So for that to be broken and to not work, that's, I understand. That's scary. And this is really going to break, a bunch of, Tamper Monkey, that's not going to work anymore once this new, once these API changes roll out and everything. Basically, and you can kind of see where if uBlock Origin, uMatrix, and Tamper Monkey, which Tamper Monkey is a way to run scripts that can alter a lot of website functionality. Like, a lot of people use Tamper Monkey to make changes to Facebook, among other things, and make these websites operate the way that you want it to, because, the web browser with that extension will essentially force it. It's easy to understand, and based on what uBlock Origin does, where it's like scanning every website and just zapping, any kind of ads or malicious JavaScript strings. It's easy to understand where Google can make the case, hey, this is, these are taking up resources because it's like rendering every page. There's a bunch of, and then the fact of how much it's reading into every page. There are genuine, even though uBlock Origin, Tamper Monkey, extensions like that are totally legit, have tons and tons of users, okay, and installs, if not millions of installs. Even though that's the case, their argument is that, yeah, but there's a bunch of extensions that can take advantage of the same abilities that Tamper Monkey and uBlock Origin do for good, even though Tamper Monkey could be used for, doing malicious shit. That, the potential for some kind of bad actor creating an extension that takes advantage of these abilities that, uBlock Origin and Tamper Monkey can do, that's just too great. That's too great a risk. We got to kill that ability. So, for example, a lot of ad blockers are not going to work with Chrome anymore. AdBlock Plus, interestingly, still will, but that's because AdBlock Plus, I guess it's like the listing functionality. It's not just this broad, no, kill all ads, right? Like uBlock Origin does. So, all right, this is ugly. Now, some people are saying, oh, this is actually because Google already blocks some ads. This is really Google just trying to take over control of, more ad revenue systems and so on. Or this is not. Yeah, basically they're saying this is taking control away from the user, and it is. Okay, and is it going to help Google with ad revenue and so on if they don't have to worry about ad blockers and their ad blocking or their ad streaming solutions become more viable or necessary? Sure, all of those arguments are spot on. It is bullshit. Okay, that Google is doing this. Really, what you want to do is just educate people on this whole thing. Or, there's so many fundamental things that have to change with this. What would be the best thing that Google could do is just fucking block all those ads, straight up. But of course that would kill, Google's entire, money-making scheme. So they can't really do that. I'll be honest. I'm inclined to almost believe them that they are doing this thinking that it is going to allow for greater security, because by its very nature, yes, it is. Granted, that greater security is getting rid of user options. Sometimes that is a trade-off that happens. Okay, and I'm not saying that it's a good one, but anyway, I almost believe Google, but then I never trust them anyway. So this is bullshit. Now, of course, what's the answer to this? Well, use Firefox, for fuck's sake. Firefox hopefully won't follow standard on this. And even though they are using a Chrome compatibility layer, it's really just a layer. It's not like you can just install any, you can't go to the Chrome Web Store and install extensions and add-ons or whatever from that right into Firefox, right? They use their own add-ons repository. So, but I mean, this is the importance of, like I mentioned earlier, how people want to say, oh shit, we better, why can't Firefox just switch to its own engine? Why can't Firefox just finally give in and everybody uses Chromium? Because if everybody uses Chromium, then in many ways, as Google being really the top steward of the Chromium code base, which is open source, but they're the steward of it, that would really fuck with, this would affect everybody then. So it's great that there are other alternatives out there like Firefox that run on entirely different code bases. And I mean, that's really important. And this is just showing how important that is. So, Firefox might be kind of a niche browser for people that want to be able to do this, certainly. And that's not to say Firefox is perfect. Like, I am really disappointed at Firefox's really very slow pace in taking advantage of security keys, like YubiKeys, physical keys, and allowing them for logins and 2FA and so on. I'm really pissed off about that. I know there's a flag you can hit where it kind of works, but believe me, it doesn't always work. And I think one of the smartest things that people can do is set up Google's advanced protection program if you have a Google account or if you use an Android phone. But if you use Firefox as your primary browser, you can't take advantage of that. And that's a very real problem. But again, that's why it all comes down to choice. What to you, what is your threshold for security? What is security? What does security mean to you? Does it mean taking advantage of things like Tamper Monkey or even still NoScript or uBlock Origin? Does it mean Google's advanced protection program? What does it mean for you? What does your workflow look like? This is why we need to have options in browsers, and we don't want a monoculture. This is why you never want a monoculture. It's such a clear-cut case, and for people to be pissed off about it, rightfully so they can be, whether Google is being completely, if they're being completely on the up and up about this, and this really is about privacy and security, which again, the argument does make sense that they're making. If it's really about that, okay, still other people have maybe more advanced knowledge of how to do things, and they should have a web browser that allows them to do their advanced shit on the web. Plain and simple. It's amazing to me when people talk about, oh yeah, we need web standards, we need this, we need that, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, yeah, but once you have web standards, this kind of shit can end up getting rid of your favorite extension, right? So, no. I mean, yeah, you want some standards, but you want options within those standards, and you just create some degree of interoperability and you'll be fine. I mean, that's how the internet got to where it is today anyway. So anyway, interesting story to bring up. I probably wouldn't get to it on a Sovereign Tech Prime episode, but the ultimate answer is use a different web browser, and Firefox is doing very well for itself. They have made phenomenal leaps and, phenomenal strides as far as, compatibility and so on with, a lot of things that normally were only compatible with Google Chrome. And they've made great strides with speed and RAM usage and all kinds of other things that, in many ways, I think it's the superior browser today. So yeah, jump on it if this is a concern for you. And look, ad blocking is so important. I fully support people. I mean, do genuine ad blocking. Block all the fucking ads. Don't worry about the websites saying, we see you're using an ad blocker. Could you please turn that off so we can make some money? That's on them to figure out how they're going to make money. It's on you to run a secure fucking system, okay? Because the more secure we all are, the more secure we all are. Or should I put it another way? The more secure you are, the more secure we all are. How about that? It's a fact, okay? So anyway, let's get on to this is a fun question, okay? So we're getting out of the tech realm here. And we're going to get biblical. Whew. This question comes in from just a phenomenal human being. Let's read it. It's kind of lengthy, but we'll break it down. Hey there, back to the biblical questions for me. Have you heard of, and if so, what do you make of it, that Isaac was born with a feminine soul? Okay, Stallion breaking in for a second. Isaac, that being Isaac, the son of Abraham, father of Jacob, right? You know, like all the Jews always like to say, it's like, you know, the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Woo! Or maybe they say Abraham, Isaac, and Israel instead of Jacob, because Jacob gets renamed Israel later. Anyway, so Jacob, son of Abraham, Isaac, son of Abraham. This is the son that ends up getting taken up the mountain to get sacrificed by order of God. But then God, well, whatever happens there, we'll talk about that. But you could say, fortunately, Abraham didn't have to kill Isaac because God said, oh, no, you've proven your faith, blah, blah, blah. Well, in Judaism, there's a pretty different interpretation of that, but let's keep reading here. So Isaac was born with a feminine soul. Have I heard about this? Yes, but let's read on with the question. I believe it's a Hasidic interpretation, not written directly as such in the Bible. It's derived from the fact that the Bible says that Isaac is Sarah's son, not Abraham's son, which, by the way, is a phrasing only used 3 other times in the Bible. The Bible also says that God answered his prayers, not Rebekah's prayers, to have Esau and Jacob, indicating he was the one who would have had trouble impregnating her, not her having trouble getting pregnant, which is apparently a symptom of him having a female soul. According to the rabbis, his near-death experience is when he got rid of his first soul and got a new masculine soul. Now, the near-death experience is when his father takes him up the mountain and is going to sacrifice him to the Lord. Reading on. In Judaism, near-death experiences are actually considered a time when you are reborn. Many Jews who experience this take on another name after such an experience, but I digress. That is Stanley breaking in. That is a common practice. When I was in the military, I was actually shot, and there might be a reason there's a Brian Sovereign now. Anyway, reading on. Many Jews who experience, take on another name. But anyway, mind you, the other 3 mentioned above with female souls also all had near-death experiences or were outright dead and resurrected. Coincidence? I think not. Of course, he's mentioning like Samuel, Jonah, and so on. Anyway, according to the rabbis, him having a female soul is also the reason he was so obedient and passive when it came to Abraham almost sacrificing him. Supposedly, God kind of needed to make this happen to get rid of his initial feminine soul, which is why Abraham and God get away with this crazy practical joke. Anyway, my take, though I doubt it's mine, is that, and Stanley breaking in, this is interesting. Like, I like what he thought up here, okay? And I'll break down more about this whole idea of the feminine soul, or should I say, more accurately, it's a soul from the feminine world. That's how it actually gets said. Or it's a soul from the masculine world. We'll break that down in a second here, but let's read this. Anyway, my take, though I doubt it's mine, is that Isaac was born to Sarah when she was very old. And, of course, many people, Stanley breaking in, many people remember that story, right? Oh, Sarah is barren. Sarah's too old. She can't have a kid. And then she ends up having a kid. Okay. And he probably had birth defects that impacted his developmental, cognitive, and other capacities. It's probably what made him so gullible. Gullible to Abraham, telling him that God will provide the sacrificial lamb when they were climbing up to Mount Moriah, when in fact there is no lamb, and gullible to Rebekah and Jacob when he gave his blessing on his deathbed to Jacob instead of to Esau. It's probably why Abraham was going to kill him to begin with, kind of what people did back then with mentally handicapped kids. Probably why Abraham had to have his men find Isaac a wife. He couldn't get one himself. Probably why Rebekah manipulated him to give Jacob the blessing and didn't treat her own husband like an adult, etc. So Stanley breaking in for a second on all of those stories. Of course, there's a classic story where Jacob ends up, Esau is the older son, but Jacob ends up kind of making a deal with Esau and then tricking Isaac into thinking that he's Esau. And so Isaac gives him the blessing and Jacob becomes, the inheritor, and, he gets renamed to Israel later on. And that's where all of the Hebrews and, all the Jews end up, spawning from and everything. And then, that's the blessed people, the chosen people and so on, the descendants of Israel. So anyway, you might know that story. I mean, I don't want to regale all of these stories here, but anyway, let me finish the question. Anyway, curious if the story has more to it and if you know more about gender fluidity in the Bible. From this story, it's surprising that they acknowledge it could happen, but unsurprising that they view it negatively in a way that a man with a feminine soul is defective. Eager to hear Rabbi Stallion's teachings. I got quite a few people calling me something along those lines, either Rabbi Stallion or Rabbi Sovereign. I guess I'm just going to keep running with it. So if you want to call me Rabbi, what the hell? I am a Kohanim, so I guess genetically I earned it already. I don't know. But anyway, let's talk about this. So talking about a lot of people don't know, like Judaism, especially in reference to Kabbalah or, Hasidic Judaism, which integrates a ton of Kabbalah, including the Book of Zohar and so on, the Book of Bahir, right, and Sefer Yetzirah, and a lot of these other books that I've read, admittedly, I'll admit to that. But Judaism has very unique things to say about the soul. For example, and again, more particularly within like Kabbalah, while there is a masculine, like we said, there's a soul from the masculine world and there's a soul from the feminine world. We'll break down the differences as far as that goes. But within Judaism itself, or within Kabbalah more specifically, and again, I would argue that Kabbalah is Judaism. They're really not separate. But every Jew actually has two souls. There is the soul that is kind of more the soul of man, or the human soul. There's the more animalistic soul where like anger and a lot of these other things come from. And this is a soul that has to get purified before you, get to have your place in the world to come, or not exactly the afterlife, but, the messianic age that Jews are waiting for. But then there's the other soul that Job describes as a part of God, okay? And this can get into some very weird interpretations, all right? But there's this other soul that's already all set and, ready to go, and it is in constant conflict with the animal soul. Okay, so already there's kind of like this oddity where, okay, wait, there's feminine and masculine souls, but then every Jew, and this would include Isaac, as far as I understand it, and Abraham, all of them, have like two souls anyway. So which one of those which one is that referencing? Is it referencing the soul that's a part of God, or is it referencing the more animalistic soul that's actually, is it masculine or feminine? I can't really say. I would assume all souls effectively come from God, so it might affect both of them. Okay, but this is getting into, you can already see where confusion settles in, right? And there's some other confusing aspects really around this entire story of Isaac and Rebekah and so on, especially around their ages, which I will talk about here in a second. So the idea of masculine and feminine, okay, first off, the feminine aspects of God are something that are widely disregarded, really, in a lot of other Jewish trains of thought that try to ignore Kabbalah. Kabbalah readily, admits and venerates the feminine aspects of God, the Shekinah, right? The Shekinah glory, and, and all of this. Again, that's another just huge fucking subject. Okay. But now when rabbis talk about, biological, not biological, when they talk about like masculine and feminine souls, they don't really mean like, they're not referencing any kind of biology. Like they're not saying, because if that were true, so, like the patron was bringing up, basically the idea is that Isaac had to, that event that was supposed to, or was claimed to have ended with his sacrifice, which it didn't. That is what gave him his masculine soul, okay? And before that, he couldn't have kids. Now, here's the thing. If a feminine soul was referencing, feminine biology or female biology, obviously that doesn't make any sense. Then the female biology would be the one that could have kids. Okay, so this isn't like really a male-female thing. This has more to do very much with, in ways, I mean, not aspects of God necessarily, but aspects of what your purpose is on earth from God. And that really has nothing to do with biology, okay? Because there are, based upon, so when you say, when a rabbi says, or when Torah, Torah doesn't exactly ever say it, but anyway, it hints at it, right? Because so when Isaac is getting born, Sarah laughs. Now, why does she laugh? She laughs because the way that the angel says that she's going to have a son, the angel says, Sarah will have a son. Doesn't say Abraham will have a son. So Sarah will have a son. And so Sarah knows, being knowledgeable, right? Probably learning shit from her husband, who, supposedly practiced Sefer Yetzirah and all this crazy, Kabbalistic magics and so on. She had an idea, and she knew, when he said that meant that her son was going to have an unusual soul. That he was going to have a feminine soul, which is kind of referencing, a female in a way, but that's really not what that means. I mean, the ideas might play on some gender norms, but again, this, when you get into souls, believe me, when you start studying the soul, especially the Jewish soul within Kabbalah, this is one of the most complex subjects in the world. Like, try fucking applying any gender to these things. I mean, and your head's going to spin. So, so these are just terms that end up getting used. For example, the masculine, a soul from the masculine world is a soul that inspires, say, the soul bearer, the person, in this case would have been Isaac, to, be proactive, outgoing, transform the world. Like, you're someone that's going to be out there to change the world. As to where if it's a feminine soul that you have, it's more about, kind of accepting the world as it is and just trying to go about your day, properly living Torah. Like that, but that's really the breakdown. That's really how that works. Did it keep Isaac from having a son, from having children? I know that's the way some rabbis interpret it. I would say more that it kept Isaac, if I'm not saying I believe in all this soul stuff either, but if the way that rabbis talk about this is, if it were so, then really what it was keeping Isaac from doing is going forward with God's plan, because the descendants of Isaac, particularly Jacob, and Jacob's descendants more specifically, would change the world, would transform the world, would be, the holy nation of kings and priests, right? That being the Israelites. So he couldn't, it's not that I don't know that it's necessarily he couldn't have kids, all right, because he had a feminine soul. That doesn't really make sense. It's more that it kept him from fulfilling his mission and the purpose of his children if he birthed the child while having a feminine soul, or a soul from the feminine world. Okay, so that's really more how I think that should be interpreted. But again, this whole conversation around souls get weird. Like, so in Kabbalah, and this is something a lot of people also just don't know, Kabbalah accepts and teaches as fact the concept of reincarnation. But it is a very weird conversation. And there are so many, like much of Judaism is, there's just argument after argument going back and forth. But there is the idea that souls get reincarnated into, if a guy sinned quite a bit, he could end up getting reincarnated. A male soul could end up getting reincarnated into a woman. But even that's not necessarily talking about masculine and feminine. That's more talking about someone that was biologically a man, and then what happens when he gets reincarnated. But if the woman has a male soul, she can't give birth. This is just a wildly complex subject. I know I keep saying that, but you got to understand that it's not something that lends itself to very easy explanation, as far as what does masculine soul mean? What does feminine soul mean? I mean, I gave you the basics, but, the concepts of souls go way beyond that. I mean, even with Kabbalah, there's 5 souls, or 5 different aspects to the soul, but that being the godly soul, not necessarily the animal soul. I mean, you can see how this goes. And it gets a little weirder too, right? Because so when the feminine soul is expelled from Isaac, that is the day, according to, rabbinical tradition, that is the day that Rebekah is born. Okay, so like Rebekah is literally Isaac's soulmate. In fact, arguably this could be where that whole concept comes from, because she has what was originally his soul. That's the idea. Now, where reincarnation fits into that, holy shit, again, another massive conversation. But you run into weird things with this, because based upon the ages and the time frames and like the years given as to when this happened, there are rabbis who will tell that when, how old was Isaac when he got taken up Mount Moriah, to get sacrificed? Some say he was 37. Here's the problem. We know, the one thing we don't doubt is that he got married at 40. So if Rebekah was born on the day that he was supposed to be that Isaac was supposed to be sacrificed, that means he married her at 3 years old. Okay. You're going to find, I'm sure, somewhere on the internet, somebody says that that's what happened. No. Okay. In fact, there's a Hebrew word there, I think, that makes it very clear that Isaac actually ends up getting, because again, people bring up the argument that, yeah, in fact, Sarah died the day that they went up Mount Moriah and so on. And, but the Bible or the Tanakh is perfectly clear that there's no way Rebekah was 3 years old when she married Isaac. It's just not possible. First off, I think there's a Hebrew term that makes it very clear that, and I forget what it is, but makes it very clear that Isaac must have been maybe like 14 or something like that when it happened. Okay. And when that way, like pretty much when he was 40, Rebekah would have been around 25 or so, something like that. But the reason we know that that's not how it worked out, that Rebekah wasn't just 3 years old, okay, when she got married, is because we know how Abraham's men finds Rebekah. She's working the well. And I'm not a parent, but I've seen 3-year-olds, and I know a lot of my listeners are parents. What 3-year-old can work the fucking well and feed the camels? Right. And not only that, but when they find Rebekah and they take her back, to meet her husband, to meet Isaac, she's riding atop a camel. She gets off the camel and she recognizes he's this very spiritually powerful man, puts a veil on and all this. There's just it's not a 3-year-old. That's impossible. Okay. In fact, there's no reason to not suspect that she wasn't a woman in her 20s. Okay, when this all went down. But that's the confusion that exists around this, and the varying interpretations that exist around this very, very weird story. And it's a story, taken at face value without any of this concept of, the feminine soul that had to get replaced by a masculine soul inside of Isaac. And so this event had to occur. It was a spiritual sacrifice in a very quote unquote real way. But taken at face value without all that, it's just one of the most reprehensible things you could ever read in any book, ever, and should instantly turn anyone away from the book. And I would argue that even if it was just meant to be a spiritual sacrifice where there's a replacement of souls, it's still not okay. And why the fuck couldn't God just give him a masculine soul from the get-go? From the minute that Isaac's born. It's God. Can't he change everything? Can he do anything? Oh, man. It's such a mess. But again, the entire concept of souls within Judaism itself, again, the Bible doesn't exactly say it. It's more hinted at the way that the angel says things that this interpretation even comes out of. And I think the patron's interpretation that really Isaac was just like, mentally handicapped or otherwise, like that's a very interesting interpretation of this whole thing. It's just as easy to say, well, or maybe like an argument from Ahmed Osmond, right, who wrote Out of Egypt and Stranger in the Valley of the Kings, where he claims that all of these stories about Abraham, David, Solomon, and so on, they're originally about Egyptians, but they were just rewritten to fit like a different narrative. But these events sort of happened, but it was actually, various Egyptian pharaohs that this all occurred to, and that even Abraham was once an Egyptian pharaoh and so on. But if it is an actual story, if Abraham, all that was an actual thing, I think that interpretation that Isaac was mentally handicapped, sure. It's as good as any. I'm going to leave you with 3 things on this, okay? 3 concepts. One is, as far as here's one thing I want you to understand about Torah specifically, especially the first 5 books, or the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Tanakh, okay? One thing I want you to understand, but I think this is true for the Tanakh overall, or for a lot of the Tanakh. You will find Kabbalistic commentators, rabbis, who will make it very clear to you that Torah is not in the right order. Like the letters and everything, the original Hebrew letters and all that are not in the right order. And if they were, if you knew what the right order was, you could perform miracles, you could create worlds, you could do all kinds of crazy shit. Okay, this is right out of Kabbalistic works, which is exactly where, this concept of the feminine soul comes out of as well. All right, so I'm not pulling from something that is completely unrelated. It's directly related. All right, so understand that, which means that really, taking that phrase from a rabbi at face value, and believe me, a lot of people respected that concept, and there's not only one rabbi that's ever said it over time. You really can't believe anything that you're reading. Maybe some of the names and all that are a thing because, there's numerology involved. And honestly, there's numerology involved within even this story that we went over. Like Isaac's name even points at that, it does point at the fact that there was like a feminine aspect to him to the point that he's almost like Abraham's daughter. It's very odd. Some people want to take that as that actually Abraham had a daughter and we don't know about her. But that's all based upon like a numerological understanding of the Hebrew alphabet put in play during this story. Okay, but I just want you to grasp, understand that in Kabbalah, that's a thing. That really the way that all of this is supposed to be read is dead wrong, at face value. Now, the other concept that I want to put on you, okay, is that in Kabbalah, when it talks about souls, because it's talking about, for one, there's the concept of 2 souls, that every Jew actually has 2 souls. One of them is a part of God. And then there are like the 5 aspects of that soul, and those 5 aspects correlate to different worlds within the tree of life. I don't want to go on all that. It doesn't sound like, just like some people interpret, like say the book of Zohar, that the Ancient of Days is actually some kind of like manna machine, right? There's a book that I've touted many times called The Manna Machine that rabbis actually think is very interesting, by the way, or some do. But again, always understand that rabbis don't always agree, but their words are all still often kind of considered holy, or their interpretations are meant to be taken seriously, even if they're an argument with another one. Regardless, okay? That doesn't mean every rabbi is right, but that also doesn't necessarily mean that they're all that one's wrong and the other isn't. I know it's all very confusing. Think what it's like to grow up with this shit. So, but yeah, I think that in Kabbalah, when they are talking about a soul, they are actually talking about something very different. I think that they are talking about biological functions. I think they are talking about, because there's literal references, or, there are allusions to, because again, the concept of empathy is a biological function within humans. We didn't always have a word for that biological function though. Okay. But I think there's plenty of times throughout history where people are talking about empathy, even if they don't call it that. I think there are parts of Kabbalah where they are very much venerating and talking about, empathy. Okay. So when I think that and granted, obviously I understand most Kabbalists, most rabbis, whatever, take, when they're writing about the soul, or the book of Zohar is talking about a soul, they take that to mean this, ethereal, wispy thing that was granted by God and all of that, I don't think that's what's going on there. I think that there are interpretations of, say, the book of Zohar, and even the book of Behir, and so on, where there is, because there's a lot of texts where they are saying something that has some kind of root, I think, in science, or there's some kind of root in reality to what they're saying. But the third thing I'm going to leave you with, okay, is that Kabbalah does not, recognizes that the feminine is an aspect of God. And actually, I think if they were honest with themselves, if Kabbalists were honest with themselves, they'd recognize that it may be the most powerful aspect of God. Okay, it's where knowledge comes from, along other things, or along with other things. But they don't want to admit to that out of fear. Okay, and again, I'm saying this playing within their playground. All right, I'm not saying this is what I believe. I'm not saying that, like, I accept this stuff. I'm not saying that necessarily. I'm just saying that that's the deal. Okay, so get that there's a lot. There's like Transformers. There's more than meets the eye here. Okay, and it's a massively complicated subject that once you start to take it away from just being accepted as at face value, like perhaps the Christians would interpret it, right? I mean, Christians will interpret, they think there's a meta story to the binding of Isaac in that it's representative of a type of Christ. It's representative of what would happen to God's own son, that being Jesus, in the New Testament. Okay. So no one really just takes it at face value. Everyone thinks that it does have some kind of meta meaning, or meta story to it. But once you start to get into meta stories, like interpretations can just run wild. And they really can. And Judaism specifically just loves to try and explain shit and tries to make everything make sense. Jews are the number one canon junkies in history. I mean, they want everything to make sense. There cannot be a contradiction. There has to be an explanation, whatever. I mean, and they're just obsessed with that. And sometimes it ends up with some interesting concepts. Other times it ends up with what the fuck are they talking about? So there you go. I'll leave you with that. Okay. Let's get into, finally, we'll end with that. I know you asked about like gender fluidity within the Bible. I mean, I don't know of any other areas where the Bible really gets into, say, specifically gender fluidity. But again, this whole soul nonsense, I mean, is such a complex subject. So, maybe there's points where it's talking about it, but I don't really recall any further stories along this line. I mean, there's some rabbis who interpret like this whole idea of masculine and feminine souls. I mean, they take it really far where like actually it's a punishment, maybe because of homosexuality. I mean, where a man's soul ends up in a woman and then that woman is barren and there are various punishments that come with being barren. I mean, it gets, it can get really, really judgy and really, really misogynistic and well, I'll say it, patriarchal in a very negative sense very quickly. But I, personally, I think that they are even within their own game, I think that they're interpreting it dead wrong. So anyway, there you go. That's what I got. I hope that made sense. Because again, that's such a huge, I love the question, but it's a huge subject. There's so much to talk about there. So, okay. Why don't we get into, again, like I said, our album of the week. And fuck, man, I have been waiting for this album. Originally, it was supposed to come out December 4th, 2018. It got delayed for some reason, and it ended up coming out, it hasn't technically come out yet. It's supposed to come out February 1st, 2019. If you go to certain sites, you might be able to get your hands on it already. But the album is Within Temptation's Resist. That's the name of the album, is Resist, and the band is Within Temptation. I'm a huge fan of Within Temptation. Huge fan. This album, there were like 4 songs released over the past, I guess maybe 4 or 5 months. And each of those songs was pretty good to great. Like The Reckoning, which was the first single released for this album, and it's what opens the album up, is easily the best song on there, and it's a great song. Real fist pumper. I mean, just a badass metal anthem. And Within Temptation is a power metal act with a female lead. She's amazing. Her voice is awesome. This album is definitely not as good as The Unforgiven, which was, I think that came out in 2011. It's not, they had an album in between this and The Unforgiven. It was called Hydra, which also wasn't as good as The Unforgiven. The Unforgiven is like a concept album that's this vampire hunter story. But the music's amazing. Like, it's one of the best albums ever made, straight up. It's that good. And I mean it really. It's that good. The first 5-6 tracks just kick your ass. That is not so with Resist. It's not a bad album at all, but it's also not as good as The Unforgiven. But yeah, The Reckoning, it opens up with that. That's again, easily the best song on there. Very hard rocker. It has this really interesting, in fact, I think the lead singer from Papa Roach is a guest vocalist on it. Has this really interesting like horn section that comes in at first that you got to hear it to believe it. The second song, Endless War, pretty good. Raise Your Banner, that's track 3. That's probably the second best song on there. Then it goes into Supernova, which is actually a bit of a dance track. I mean, there's a variety of different types here. There's Firelight, which is a very slow song that had been released previously. Yeah, I mean, it changes tone and tempo quite a bit. It's a very mixed bag. There's not like one set tonal theme throughout the album. I think it pays for it with that. Like, I think that hurts it. But at the same time, what's there is none of it is really bad. Just none of it is necessarily as great as The Reckoning or Raise Your Banner. Now, for the life of me, I don't understand. You know, we were never really given an answer as to why the album was delayed. I thought, and I mentioned this in a previous Wednesday Q&A when I thought the album was supposed to come out, I thought maybe, okay, they had to do some remastering or something, make the album sound a little more solid, you know, get in a little extra punch or something. If they did that, you know, if their claim is that that's what they did not do that on any of the 4 songs that they had released previously, because all of those sound exactly the same. And all 4 of those songs, other than Endless War, which didn't get pre-released as far as I know, are easily the best songs off of there. Again, the rest of it's good. It's just definitely a lot weaker. And yeah, I don't know. I'd love to find out why they decided to delay it. Maybe they just wanted it to come out in 2019 and be a part of the, or, you know, in 2019 instead of 2018 and be a part of the 2019 award scene. I don't know. You know, maybe they knew what was coming up in 2019 and they thought they'd have a better shot of either selling better or that they'd get more awards or what. I have no idea. But I can't really hear any reason based upon what I heard in 2018 why this should have been delayed at all. But anyway, I'm glad that it's out. It's just the only problem is that I don't really feel inspired to listen to any of the other songs on it than what was released in 2018, you know, officially by the band. So, and that you could listen to on streaming services, because streaming services, one advantage that they have, yes, you can download them on torrent sites as well, or rip them off of YouTube, you know, any of these singles that get released. Streaming services are nice because they'll put the album in their catalog, and whatever singles are released from the band already, even if the album hasn't totally come out, they will allow you to stream and listen to. Dynamite. That's actually a really cool feature, I have to admit. That's not, I know, you know, back in the days of audio cassettes and CDs more, you know, you could buy singles before a full album came out too. So it's not exactly new or original, but it's out there and it's easy to get access to, and you know, that's kind of nice. But this almost comes off, again, the album's good. Okay. In fact, some of the songs on it, like I said, are great, but it feels like a disappointment because they made us wait for it, and the songs that we had to wait for weren't worth any wait at all. Like, I mean, they're just not worth the fucking wait. And I'm not knocking Within Temptation. In fact, there was a great interview with the lead singer, and she was talking about, oh yeah, you know, she was talking about like, oh, we grew up with Commodore 64s because they're out of like Switzerland or Sweden or whatever. They're like, yeah, we grew up with a Commodore 64. We had that forever. Boy, you know, isn't it crazy? Because the album apparently does have a theme of resistance, right? You know, that's why they're calling it Resist. And she's, you know, talking about privacy concerns and everything. And she's like, yeah, you know, computers used to be really, like, it's stuff I'd say on Cybertech, and I was really impressed. You know, how computers used to, you know, open your mind and all this stuff, and now it feels like they're enslaving you, and you know, you have no privacy. It was a fascinating interview. I think it was on Blabbermouth. But anyway, yeah, the album it feels kind of like a disappointment just because we had to wait longer, and you know, what we waited for, none of it was worth the wait. So, but if you like Within Temptation, there's a lot to love here. Again, there's 4 or 5 tracks on there that are phenomenal out of 10. So, I mean, for half of the album to be good, if not great, that's saying something. Most albums are lucky if they have 1 or 2 great songs on them, you know, or 1 or 2 songs that are even passable. But yeah, for a 10 track, I don't know, maybe they'll come out with a deluxe edition and there'll be some interesting stuff on that. But yeah, it just was really disappointing to wait for it. And again, there's nothing there really worth waiting for. But the opening track, The Reckoning, is fucking awesome. I mean, it's definitely one of the, you know, if I had maybe, I don't know if I'd put it in a top 100 metal tracks, but in a top 500 metal tracks of all time, out of all metal ever done, and you know how much there is of that, it easily sit in a top 500, and that's a hell of a compliment to give it. So do check that out. Anyway, that's it for, I guess this will be our last Wednesday Q&A for January 2019, and we're going into February, baby, and we're going in hot. Woo! Anyway, I will see all of you on the other side.